Good evening. My name's Karl. I'm an alcoholic. Just one question. Can I take you home with me? That is, yeah. I mean, this is a wonderful, wonderful custom of actually giving us a temporary delusion that we are important, being escorted in here. I just love that. And I really want to thank the committee. I would like to thank Kay and Marty and especially Carol and Craig. There he is, way back there, for picking me up at the airport. It's always an honor to be asked to do this type of thing. Well, I love those bagpipes. They just rattle my bones. There's no other instrument that does that to me. I just love that. I just loved it. It was wonderful. Gary was wonderful. If you missed him, you missed out. It was a lot of fun listening to Gary. It really was. And I'm sure all the other speakers are just going to be amazing. So if you're new and you don't know it yet, don't miss the meetings. It's really important to go to the meetings at a convention. It's just very, very important. Anyway, most important thing I can tell you about myself is that I'm an alcoholic. And the reason I believe I'm an alcoholic is because I have a really bizarre relationship with alcohol. It has baffled me my whole life, and it's baffled everyone that's known me my whole life. And the best way, the first part of my bizarre relationship with alcohol happens when I drink it. It's really strange. This strange thing, the book calls it an allergic reaction takes over. They call it the phenomenon of craving. And that, the best way I can describe the phenomenon of craving in my life is that when I drink alcohol, I seem to get thirstier the more I drink. The more booze I drink, the thirstier I get. And it happens with nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. An example of that, they were kind enough to get me a glass of water that I'll probably drink most of it over the next 45 minutes or an hour that I'm talking. However, after I finish this glass of water, I can guarantee you that I'm not going to go get a case of water and lock myself in the hotel room. I'm not going to do that. Happens only with booze. But if that's the only thing that made me alcoholic, is this strange thing that happens to me when I drink it, if that's the only thing that made me alcoholic, well then, Just Say No would have wiped out alcoholism, wouldn't it have? In the early 80s, when Nancy Reagan came out and said, just say no, I would have, and I imagine you would have gone, oh, and gone on for a happy and successful life, just saying no. I certainly would not have gotten on a plane at midnight in Covina, California last night to come out here. I mean, when they called me to come out here, I would have said, you know, that's pretty inconvenient. And they would have said something like, well, how are you staying sober then? And I would have said, well, I'm just saying no. What are you doing? I have this other bizarre part of my relationship with alcohol, and that is my mind. I've got a really bizarre mind. It will rationalize and justify my walk back to the next drink at all costs. It will minimize very important things. It will minimize tragedies in order for me to take that walk back to the next drink. Just a light example of that is that handcuffs. My whole life, prior to getting here, I really thought that handcuffs were just a minor and temporary inconvenience. That's what I thought they were, and I had to rationalize and justify that. Because, I mean, handcuffs are, well, they're kind of a big deal, really. I was like 6, maybe 9 months sober in Alcoholics Anonymous when an old-timer told me the truth about handcuffs, and it absolutely astonished me. He told me, son, the truth about handcuffs are, they are a symbol from society saying, excuse me, we don't even trust you with your own hands. So anyway, I set this physical and mental relationship up with alcohol the very first time I drank. I didn't drink till much later in my life compared to a lot of people in AA. I was 11 when I started. And I wasn't trying to cover up any giant spiritual void that I was having. It was just, I don't know, I was maybe on my way back from violin lessons or playing Hot Wheels, I don't know, and all of a sudden it became a good idea. What I did was I stole a bottle, my parents were out of town for the weekend, I stole a bottle of wine from my father. I locked myself in his study and I proceeded to drink. And halfway through that first bottle of wine, I got this feeling that was just amazing. Oh, man, I remember taking this big, deep breath, just, See, I didn't know I'd been short of breath for the first 11 years of my life, but man, I was breathing easier now. And that's the last thing that I remember of that night was that feeling. And the next thing I remember is I came to in my bedroom. It's the next day, and I kind of sit up straight and I look around and there's puke everywhere. I mean, all over the walls, all over the floor, in the pillowcase, in my underwear. I mean, everywhere. And I knew I was going to have to puke again. I made it into the bathroom, realized I'd puked all over the bathroom floor. I slipped on the bathroom floor, hit my head on the toilet bowl going down. And as I crawled back up to get my head back in the toilet bowl, that looks really strange from this like, porcelain field on the side of my face. I was just like, and I got my head back in the toilet bowl and I started to heave. And I made it into that dry heave stage, you know, where you're still jerking back and forth. Nothing's coming out. You're just, right? And I'm right in the middle of that. In my mind, all of a sudden I hear my own voice. My lips aren't moving, but I hear my own voice say, this is all right. We're going to do this again. So right there, that physical and mental relationship was set up right there. I lost control over the amount that I drank. The next morning, rationalized and justified that this puking was no problem. No problem. So I started drinking alcoholically right off the bat right there, 11 years old. We lived in Seattle, and a typical morning for me in 7th grade would be I'd show up early for school, not for study hall or anything, but to meet my new friends at the very edge of the school property, loser's corner. Every school's got a loser's corner where everybody hangs out and smokes cigarettes, and right. And there'd be about 4 or 5 of us even separated from the cigarette smokers, and we'd have what I like to call the playground cocktail. That's a jar full of the parents' liquor cabinet mixture, right? And that is a scary jar because nobody's been to bartending school yet. And so there are equal amounts of whiskey, vodka, creme de menthe, vermouth, all in that jar. There's green things floating around in that. You can imagine a bunch of us 12-year-olds trying to choke that down and hand that around. And of course it was the early 70s, so we're smoking that commercial pot. Anybody remember that stuff? 4-finger lids, $10 a bag, seeds and stems and the whole bit. And it was it was even before Ziploc days when it would just be a regular Glad bag. And as you'd roll it up, there'd be about 9 people spit on it like, oh, man. We'd pack all those seeds and stems and leaves into a homemade pipe, maybe made out of plumbing fittings and a screen. Or if we were really desperate that morning, it would be a toilet paper roll with aluminum foil and pinholes in it. Were you guys there too? Yeah. We'd pack all those seeds and stems and leaves in there. We hit the lighter on the seeds and stems. We'd be popping. We'd be burning holes in our clothes. And we'd look at each other like, are we going to school today? It's funny, nobody ever said, yeah, we're late for math, hurry up. Now, it's at this point that many people that speak in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous often interrupt themselves and say something like this. I don't mean to offend anybody, but drugs are a part of my story. I understand why they do that, but I still think it's a very bizarre thing for alcoholics to apologize to other alcoholics for doing drugs while drinking or in between drunks. I understand apologizing to police officers and judges and all of that. In fact, the most bizarre example I've ever seen of that, it was a number of years ago. I was in a speaker meeting, big speaker meeting in Southern California, and the speaker that night was just given one of the most ugly, heinous, blow-by-blow drunkalogs I've ever heard. And I got to tell you, when I'm in a speaker meeting and the drunkalog gets ugly, the uglier it gets, the more excited I get. I think that night I was on the edge of my chair drooling, looking up at the speaker going, yeah, go, 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 go. And at one point in this really ugly story, the speaker said, you know, I had 4 DUIs, and the judge said if I got one more DUI, I was going to prison for sure. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was on the freeway in a blackout. I hit a family of 4. They all wound up in the hospital. I wound up in prison. In prison, I sodomized men. I was sodomized. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but I did some drugs too. I was the only one that thought that was strange that night. So anyway, by the time I'm 14, I'm the neighborhood drunk, I'm the neighborhood drug dealer. I forgot to mention, but my father was a neighborhood Lutheran minister. I wish he would have been chuckling about this. He was not chuckling at all. And my parents, really good, solid people in the community. Really, really solid people. And they saw me withering away in front of their eyes. I mean, it was no secret to them because, you know, before 11 years old when I started drinking, I had a vocabulary. I was involved in sports and music and loved school, loved being part of the family. I mean, by the time I'm 14, my hair's down in front of my bloodshot eyes and my vocabulary is, whoa, wow, right? And they always tried to help me, right? They were always trying to help me, but you see, they always blamed my problems on people, places, and things. They always thought if we can get him away from that damn group of kids he's hanging out with, things would get better. If we can get him out of that damn public school system, things would get better. But you see, I'm an alcoholic. My problems are not based upon people, places, and things. My problems are based upon my physical and mental relationship with alcohol. See, if you change the people, places, and things in somebody's life like mine, all that happens is that I'm loaded with different people, in different places, ruining different things. That's all that happens. By the time I was about 17, maybe close to 18, I barely scraped out of the public school system there in Seattle, and my parents decided that Seattle was the problem. If we can get them out of Seattle, things will get better. So they sent me 300 miles away to Washington State University. I spent 3 years at that university on my parents' money, and in that 3 years, I got approximately 10 credits. At any given time, my grade point average matched my blood alcohol content, about a 0.25. By the time I was 22, this little story I'm about to tell you will let you know exactly where I stood with my family. Now, my father was Swedish, my mother is Icelandic. Therefore, I look kind of like a polar bear. That's why I look the way I do. And I don't know whether this custom I'm about to tell you about is Scandinavian or whether it's Lutheran. I don't know. But at Christmas time, my parents would not just send out Christmas cards to their friends and relatives. They would send out this big, long Christmas letter that said everything the family had been doing that year. And when I was about 22, I got a hold of one of these letters that had been sent out the previous Christmas. And as I read it, it let me know exactly where I stood with my family. First paragraph talked about what my parents had been doing that year. Another impressive year, I'm sure. The second paragraph talked about what the Morris children had been doing that year, and that paragraph went something like this. Our oldest daughter, Christina, just graduated from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, with a master's degree in marketing. She's now working for a large pharmaceutical company in the Midwest. She traveled to Europe this summer. She saw this, she saw that. Her hobbies are this, this, and this. She's a very happy young woman. We're very proud of her. Our oldest son, Eric, just graduated from Western Washington State University with a degree in advertising. He's now working for a large advertising firm here in Seattle. He loves to golf. He loves to travel. He's engaged to be married to this wonderful woman named Mary Lou, who works for a very small company here in Seattle named Microsoft. It was a while ago. They love to golf together. They love to travel together. He's a very happy young man. We're very proud of him. Our youngest son, Karl, just turned 22. Long story short, it's one of those nights. Drug deal went very, very badly. I joined the Navy. It's really a long story. We just don't need to get into it. What I'm about to tell you should scare the daylights out of you, but on my way into the Navy, I passed a potential test. It's called the Asvab Test, and this test qualified me to become a nuclear engineer. That should scare the daylights out of you, that the Navy was even thinking maybe, possibly, or even remotely about putting somebody like me near anything nuclear. However, they made me take another test when I showed up at that base, and I could not pass that particular test. It's called a urinalysis test is what it's called. Always had trouble with those. And I was immediately kicked out of the nuclear engineering group and transferred to this group the Navy affectionately called nuclear waste is what they called us. Now, I'll never forget that day in boot camp. Been in boot camp maybe 2 weeks, and this master at arms came into the barracks, and he had this list with names on it. And I knew I was going to be on that list. And the other guys whose names were on there, they knew. And they called off the names, and they marched us out of the barracks, and they put us into this van and took us to another section of the Great Lakes Naval Station. They pulled up in front of this one administrative building. The other guys were told to get out. I was told to stay in the van. They were marched in there for some sort of processing of some sort. They took me to an adjacent building, marched me right into the commanding officer's office, the guy who ran the whole Great Lakes Naval Station. Big office, plush carpet, pictures of naval vessels all around the walls, big oak desk, and a guy with a lot of gold sitting behind it, and I was marched right up in front of him. And he asked me my name. I told him my name. He had this telephone sitting on his desk that had a speakerphone button on it. And he pushed that speakerphone button, and into that telephone he said, "Walt." It's my father's name. My father had been a reservist chaplain since World War II in the Pacific Northwest. This was an old World War II buddy of my father's. As he was reviewing the names of the people that should be discharged for fraudulent enlistment, that's what they call going positive on a urinalysis test. They claim they warn you about it or something. As if that would do any good. But he looked over the list of names. My last name is spelled with just one R. I was from Seattle. He thought, maybe this is Walt's son. He looked, sure enough, I was, so he called my father. And as I stood there, into this telephone, he said, "Walt, out of respect for our 40-year friendship, I thought I would call you before I took any action. Your son has gone positive for cocaine on his very first urinalysis test. Technically, he should be discharged for fraudulent enlistment. I wanted to ask you what you feel we ought to do with your son." See, over the years, I had seen this look from my parents, and it was a look of a combination of love and bewilderment. at the same time. Some nights, some mornings, I had seen this look on my father's face like somebody had just kicked the wind out of him. Didn't even know what to say at some of this stuff he was witnessing that I was participating in and that he was finding out about. And coming through that speakerphone, I heard that same tone of voice like somebody had just kicked the wind out of him. And he said, "It's not of my concern anymore." They kept me in the Navy as a conventional electrician. 2 years later, I'm a lower rank than when I first came in. How this happens is, see, when I was out on that ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I would stand on the deck of that ship and I'd look around and I'd say to myself, I'm in the United States Navy. There's no amount of alcoholic delusional thinking that could tell me that I wasn't. I mean, I'm on a big gray ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in a uniform. No doubt I'm in the Navy. However, that ship would pull into a port. I would leave that ship and take a drink. I would totally forget that I'm in the Navy. And I would come back to where I had last seen the ship when the drunk was over. And I have no control of that. And so sometimes it's a very bizarre feeling, strange feeling, to be standing on a large pier in a foreign country as you're going, you know, there was a destroyer here the other day. So one morning, I'm driving my car into the base. We're in San Diego, and there's a long straightaway before the base, and my car is being held together by rubber bands, and there's always a guard shack at the front of every base where a Marine stands duty. And if you're going to park your car on the base, you have to pull up slowly. He'll check the sticker on your car. He'll check your military ID. If everything's in order, they'll flag you forward and allow you to park on the base. This particular morning, you know, I've been drinking all weekend. I still got a bottle between my legs. I'm just trying to nurse that Monday morning hangover, just trying to keep a little bit going so I can at least stay alert. And I guess there was a depth perception problem going on between my front bumper and that guard shack. But I remember looking out the window and seeing this Marine. His head was out of the guard shack already. And I could see the whites of his eyes. And I looked down, and I'm going like 35, 40 miles an hour. I tried to swerve. The car hit this median on the right-hand side and flipped up on its side, and bam, right through that guard shack. I can still see that Marine doing this big dive out of there. Marine was all right. I was taken to the hospital, patching me up. New charges on me, nothing new, nothing significant, just something that happens in somebody's life like mine about every 90 days. And the most significant thing that happened that morning is that the Navy doctors prescribed medical science's best shot at the alcoholic, and that's antabuse. Prescribed this antabuse for me, sent this prescription back to the ship's doctor. Every single morning before quarters, I would have to show up at sick bay, and the corpsman would put this little white pill on my tongue and make me sit for a half an hour to make sure it got ingested into my body. Over the next 7 to 10 days, I started to experience the most cunning, baffling, and powerful side of this disease called alcoholism, and that is that I had developed a mental obsession with spiritual malady so severe that no amount of discipline from the military, no amount of love from anybody that may have still cared about me, no amount of want or will on my part was going to overcome. I remember counting those days on that antabuse, just it's been about 4 days, and I'm on antabuse. Now it's been about 6 days, and I'm on antabuse. Now it's been 8 days, 6 hours, and 15 minutes, and I'm on antabuse. I started to look around that ship, and the other men, they're talking behind my back. All 300 of them. Have you ever felt that way in AA? The only difference is that in AA, we are talking behind your back. Oh, only with love and tolerance in Rochester, I'm sure, though. On about the 10th day, I just snapped. And I went AWOL from my ship. I locked myself in a little hotel room in downtown San Diego, the Plaza Hotel. $13 a night. It's a wonderful place. And I remember I got a bottle of vodka and a shot glass, and I set it on this rickety little end table, and I remember sitting on the edge of the bed looking at this bottle of vodka. And as I sat there, I remembered that the Navy doctors had given me a warning about drinking on top of antabuse when they had prescribed it for me. What they had told me is, son, if you drink on top of antabuse, you need to know you will get one of two reactions. One reaction is you will get violently ill. The other reaction is you might die. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed looking at the bottle of vodka thinking, well, I wonder which reaction I'm going to get. Took one shot and nothing happened. Authority had lied to me again as far as I was concerned. I waited about 2 minutes just to make sure. And I took another shot. All of a sudden I felt tingly in the face, so I looked in this cracked little mirror that was in this hotel room, and I was bright red, blotchy and purple in places. Took another shot. All of a sudden I could feel my heart going boom, boom, boom. Looked at my shirt, I was drenched in sweat, and all of a sudden I was like, hyperventilating. We're doing all right so far. This is a very sick group if you think this is funny. I have proof of that. I have proof of that. I'm going to skip ahead a few years, 2 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, out of the Navy with an honorable discharge. And one of the amends, I had this first sponsor who was from a line of sponsorship that was just really sticklers about all the finer points of those amends. And I am so grateful for it. One of the things that they had made me make an amend for was that my parents had paid for a bachelor's degree. I either had to pay them back for it or go get what they had paid for in the first place. I did not have any other choice, one of those two. So when I got out of the Navy, I looked into VA benefits, and I got a little place up in where I live now, Covina, California, signed up for school. And in order to get some of the general ed credits out of the way in the first couple of semesters, I took a speech class. And in the first couple of days of this speech class, the instructor was just randomly pointing at students, throwing up in front of the room, giving them a topic, and asked them to talk for just a couple of minutes. The instructor was just doing that just to see what he had to work with. After about 5 or 6 students were thrown up there, he pointed at me. I hopped up to the front of the room. From the back corner, the instructor shouted out, "Talk about a bizarre situation in your life." So I told him about drinking on top of Antabuse. They did not react the way you guys reacted. They were like, took me months to get any friends in that class after that. So I'm back in the hotel room. I'm red-faced, hyperventilating, and sweating. I take another shot. And up it came. I mean, it's no warning, just straight up and out. This is a new type of puking for me. Because, you see, one of the tools for living that I got while I was drinking out there for 15 years was what I call it socially throwing up. That's where you got a little buzz on going. You know, I don't know, you can be driving, you can be at work if you happen to have a job. You can be in the park, you can be at a park, you can be at your grandmother's house. You got that little buzz on going, right? And you get that little warning. A little sour taste comes up in the back of your throat, maybe a little bit comes up, and you kind of go, And you know you've got anywhere from 15 seconds to a couple of minutes to find an appropriate place to puke. You know, if you're driving, you try to get the window down. If you're at your grandmother's house, please, at least get to a sink. If if all there is your friend's shoe, well, oh well, right? But you get that little warning. Here on this Antabuse, just straight. Thank God this hotel room is the type of hotel room where the toilet's in the same room as the bed. I found the magic of drinking on top of Antabuse. That if I would hang in there for about an hour to an hour and a half and keep drinking and keep puking and keep drinking and keep puking, enough of the Antabuse would kick out of my system and I would quit throwing up. And I would just be left with red face, hyperventilating, and sweating. And I already told you, I'm all right with that. Right? So, if there is anybody that's new or fairly new that is on Antabuse, I do want to let you know, if you want to, you can drink on top of Antabuse. But you have to get 2 things going on at the same time. First thing you got to get going on is you got to hang in there. You got to hang in there. And at the very same time, don't die. If you get those 2 things going on, well, have at it. Have at it. I drank on top of Antabuse for the last 7 months of my drinking. My second to my last drunk, I was left for dead in a motel parking lot in National City, California. I don't know if you know where National City is. National City to San Diego is kind of like South Central Los Angeles is to Los Angeles. I have no business being there. Believe me, no business. 3 guys jumped me, opened up my face, left me for dead in a motel parking lot in a pool of blood. They had to do reconstructive surgery on my face that next morning. Wired my jaw shut, stitches all through my face. My last drunk, you guys get it, I'm still drinking. Hanging in there, come on. Last drunk being let out of the San Diego jail, being brought up in handcuffs by Shore Patrol, and the officer of the deck put his arm up and said, orders have already been processed on this loser. Orders are 90 days in the brig, bad conduct discharge, or treatment. Apparently somebody had been whispering treatment. I don't remember it, but, you know, over the last couple of weeks, and whatever it was, the orders were that morning. Now, it's not that I stood there in those handcuffs on the quarterdeck of that ship and thought, you know what, I bet if I choose that treatment thing, I could beat this rap. Nor did I stand there in those handcuffs thinking, it's really a good time to get sober. It wouldn't have mattered what I thought, really, because I was in handcuffs. I don't know about you, but whenever I was in handcuffs, I had very little part in the decision-making process. I don't ever remember the authorities who had me in handcuffs go, so what do you think we ought to do? What's your choice? Door number 1, door number 2? You go where they say. That's just the deal. So I'm taken up to this treatment center, and the doors are locked behind me. Handcuffs are taken off after the doors are locked behind me. Everybody that showed up in that week, there's about 35 of us. We're all going to do this 45-day treatment thing together. It was up at the Miramar base. The Miramar Air Base, that's where the Top Gun pilot school is. Our little section was called Top Drunk, is what it's called. And everybody that showed up that week, we were going to do this 45-day thing together, and we're in this sort of group therapy session in the first few days, and a facilitator who was assigned to look out for us, I guess. If somebody were to throw a seizure, they'd call somebody or something. And they were trying to get us to talk a little bit. Nobody's talking. I don't remember anybody really being happy to be there. Everybody just sort of got their arms folded looking at the ground, and all of a sudden this one guy named Paco raised his hand. He says, can I speak? Facilitator goes, yes, what would you like to say? He goes, I hear I'm supposed to be rigorously honest with you guys. I'd like you guys to know that my real name's not Paco. Paco's just a street name I've had ever since I've been a young kid, and my real name's Randy. Will you guys call me Randy from now on? The rest of us kind of looked up from the floor, just enough time to say, yeah, whatever. Nice to meet you, Randy. But this assistant facilitator got really excited, said, oh my God, this is the first breakthrough of any honesty of any of you SOBs. Later that afternoon, Randy was paraded in front of us. They slapped a gold name tag on him that said Randy, and then we were all informed that whenever staff was not around, Randy's in charge. I guess that's delegating authority or something like that. So we just loved Randy. On about the 7th day in this place, they took us all to our first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. At least it was my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't believe I had ever been to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I do not believe I'd really come into contact with Alcoholics Anonymous at all, as far as I know. All I know is on that day they said, 6 p.m., civilian closed, parking lot. And we're out there, a bunch of us are out there, 5 white vans pull up, a couple guys hop up, start reading off names, what van to get into, and boom, out in town they took us. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in the back row with all the other sailors, and you guys are having your meeting. And I'm not one of these ones that was really defiant in the beginning. You guys caught me on my very first meeting because of this. As I sat there and listened to you guys do the readings, probably did chapter 3, chapter 5, or one or the other, read the 12 traditions, and then a bunch of people got up. It must have been a participation meeting. I didn't know there were different types of meetings, had no idea there were step studies, participation meetings, speaker meetings, meditation meetings. I had no idea of that. All I remember is that a bunch of people got up for a couple of minutes each. And between what I heard you guys read at the meeting and what most of these people talked about at the meeting, I heard something that I had never heard before, that you guys, it's like you guys reached out with one of those canes and yanked me. You guys were talking about the soul sickness of the alcoholic when we have no alcohol in our system. I had never heard. I'd heard drinking stories. I had seen drinking stories. And I had heard funny ones and tragic ones in my life, but I had never heard anybody talk about that soul sickness that we have when we have no booze in our system, because that had been confusing me for at least the 10 years prior to that day. Most of the time when authority figures would be yelling at me about my drinking, if I could have verbalized it, I would have wanted to say something like this to them. Yes, I know it looks bad. Yes, I agree. It looks bad. Yes, I know. I see that burning car over there. I know. It looks bad. But if you knew how I felt when I wasn't drinking, you wouldn't be asking me why I drink. And you guys were talking about that. I do remember one sentence from one guy that night. All I remember is the feeling that I got from that first meeting. I remember this one sentence. This one guy got called on. He walked all the way to the front. He introduced himself, and he said one sentence. I have never heard the alcoholic mind described better since in the 17 years that I've been clean and sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. This man got up there and said, my name's Frank. I'm an alcoholic. My mind would have killed my body a long time ago, except it needed it for transportation. And he went, whoa. Next night, they took us to another meeting, and I got very confused at that meeting. I don't even know what kind of meeting it was, but all I know is the more they talked, the more confused I got, because everybody at that meeting was getting up there and saying, well, my drug of choice is. And somebody was like, well, my drug of choice is. And as I was sitting there listening to that, I was thinking, oh my God, was I supposed to be choosing out there? Do they want me to choose now? What are they talking about? So the next morning, I'm back at the treatment center. I asked the counselor who'd been assigned to us, I go, Mary, last night in the meeting, they're talking about something called a drug of choice. What on earth do they mean by that? And he said, Karl, let's play a game. Now, I'm 8 days into this thing, and they got me on anticonvulsant medications. If you've ever seen anybody on those things, everything looks fine right here. But there's these little things dancing over here, and so you're spending half your time going, and then now it's over here, and so you're, right? And so I'm kind of shifty here, and Mary says, let's play a game. And I go, okay. She says, Karl, imagine this. Imagine I walk into this room and I have a tray. And on that tray, I have a bottle of Jack Daniels, an ounce of cocaine, and an ounce of Thai sticks. Which one would you take? I started to drool immediately. Just, I take them all! She starts to snap her fingers. Settle down, settle down. You don't get the game here. You can only have one. And I thought for a second. I said, well, if I can only have one, Mary, I guess I take the ounce of cocaine. She said, well, then maybe cocaine is your drug of choice. Do you understand now? I said, no. She said, what's the problem? I said, well, Mary, the only reason I take the ounce of cocaine over the other two is, well, I'd take that ounce of cocaine, I'd get the hell out of here, and I'd sell 2 8-balls. Now I'd have enough money to buy a quarter pound of Thai sticks and a case of Jack Daniels. That's what I would do. So, the only reason I bring that up is to talk about a very important aspect of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's sobriety dates. If you're new or fairly new and you're bantering back and forth in your mind, you know, that whirlwind going on, as you're going, fine, I'm fine, right? They're going through that thing, what's really my drug of choice? Am I an addict? Am I an alcoholic? And first thing I want to ask you is stay in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough to find out what alcoholism is before you decide you is not. Second thing is there's one sobriety date, no matter what you think your drug of choice is. If you work with lots of new people, as I imagine there's lots of people in here, I can tell by the enthusiasm that you guys love to work with new people, you probably run across this scenario that I do every once in a while. See a guy in my home group that I've seen for a while, I go up to him, hey, good to see you, how long do you got? Every once in a while I get, well, my drinking sobriety date is January 4th. My pot clean date is May 3rd. I blew my methamphetamine date last night. I was in Walmart all night long. I'm trying to juggle 3 different sobriety dates. It's one sobriety date. Funniest thing I ever heard about sobriety dates, same scenario. Saw this new guy around at my home group, seen him for a while, and I went up to him and said, hey, good to see you. How long do you got now? And he said, well, I had 90 days, but I drank last night, so now I have 89 days. I was like, I had to think about that one for a second. I was like, but actually, I think that falls into the same category as being down in Mexico looking at the tequila when you think, would that affect my U.S. sobriety date? Yes. Sobriety dates are international. So after 45 days, they're going to let us all out of this place. It's just what the orders were. In the last couple of days before they let us out, they gathered all 35 of us up. They were going to let us out on a Friday, and on this Wednesday, they gathered all 35 of us up, put us in this room. There's a podium up front. We're all kind of looking at each other, and all of a sudden the side door opens, and the biggest, meanest counselor in the place comes in, and he's in his full-dress uniform. And he's a Marine. And a Marine in his full-dress uniform, very impressive, very intimidating sight. And he marches up to this podium. He grabs both sides of the podium, and he leans over and stares at us. And we're just like, I mean, it was dead silent in there. And it seemed like forever. He just panned the room, looked at every one of us right in the eyes. And he finally spoke. He said, you 35 have been through one of the finest treatment centers in the world for alcoholism and drug addiction. This treatment center has been here for many, many years. And our statistics have shown us that out of you 35, only one of you will stay continuously sober from this day forward. Many of you will die, go insane, wind up in prison. It's a nice little exit pep talk they're giving, isn't it? Many of you will relapse once, twice, maybe 20 times and then make it back into long-term sobriety. But according to our statistics, only one of you will stay continuously sober from this day forward. Man, if you thought it was quiet before he said that, you could hear a pin drop now. The only thing you could hear was me going, shit. Because I knew if only one of us was going to make it, it wasn't going to be me. We all knew who it was going to be. It's going to be Randy over here, guaranteed. like the poster boy of the treatment center by now. So on this Friday afternoon, they're letting us all out. Various guys were men and women were picked up and taken back to their ships and commands and bases in various different ways. But there was about 5 of us who had been arrested in vehicles the night before. So our cars were put into an impound lot. So there's about 5 of us standing on the front doorstep of this treatment center, sea bags at our feet, and waiting there. And I was waiting for my car to be brought out of impound. When they brought my car out, I was so successful when I was out there getting loaded that when they brought my car out, they brought out my Rolls Canardly. That's the kind of car that rolls down one hill and can hardly make it up the next, is what that is. 68 Volkswagen, hole in the floorboard, push start the thing, headlight that would flap like that. And I'd always say, why are they pulling me over? Right? Anyway, there's about 5 of us standing there, just sort of shifty and looking around. And all of a sudden, one of the guys points at a car coming across the parking lot. He goes, hey, is that Randy in that car? We look, yeah, sure enough. Gets a little closer. One of the other guys says, he's drinking already. Sure enough, he's got himself a pint. He's just polishing it off. He rolls right in front of the treatment center, rolls down the window, throws the empty right at our feet. Crash! We look up. He's giving us all the finger, and he drives right off. Guess his name was Paco again. I don't know. Next thing that I remember of that day is I showed up at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, a 6 o'clock gong show meeting in the north end of San Diego, Pacific Beach. The truth about my life, I'm sitting in the back of that meeting. I don't know anybody. Truth about my life is I'm 45 days without a drink or a drug. I'm the best physical condition I've been in since I've been a young teenager, and I got a lot of information. Treatment was a wonderful, wonderful start. But you know what? There'd been no spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, or even a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. I had 45 days in a safe environment, information, physically feeling better. Dangerous. If there was ever a turning point in my life, it was right then and there in that meeting. Meeting's going along, and one guy operating on his primary purpose. I'm sure there was lots of other men operating on their primary purpose that night, but this guy was sitting in the back. He's one of those guys that lurks around the backs of meetings looking for this. He leans over and he says, hey, never seen you here before. What are you doing? I didn't think quick enough to lie to him, because I promise you, if I would have thought for one more second, I would have lied to him. And instead, I just said, I don't know, I just got out of this Navy treatment center a couple hours ago. Got me. I don't know what I'm doing. His eyes went, bing! Big smile went across his face. He looked like he had just pulled the jackpot at Las Vegas. I mean, just, yeah! Right? I didn't know there were guys in AA that just lurk around looking for new guys that don't know what they're doing. Right? There was something else going on in this guy's life that particular weekend that made him especially glad to meet me. This guy's girlfriend had left him the night before for one of his friends in his home group. So he's having a tough weekend. He's wondering what to do with his weekend. Homicide, suicide, get loaded, or grab this newcomer. He's like all over me all weekend. We went to like 18 meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous that weekend. This guy was insane the whole weekend. I mean, in between the meetings, he'd throw me in the passenger side of his car, and he'd start driving, and he'd start yelling. He wouldn't even look at the road. He had like one of those AA radar cars that just made it to the next meeting. And as he's driving, he's looking at me yelling, you got to go to meetings, you got to read the book, you got to get a sponsor. Damn her! Got to go to meetings, got to read the book, damn her! Now, I didn't know it, but I was getting a very early introduction to your typical AA relationship breakup is what I was getting. But I'm so very glad that that guy that night was a guy in Alcoholics Anonymous who had done the work of Alcoholics Anonymous, had taken the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and understood that the solution to his pain was out of self, out of self, out of self. I am so glad that that guy that night in his pain was not at home underneath his covers, whining into his sponsor's answer machine, where are you? She left, call me back, right? I am so glad he was out dragging my sorry butt around, right? And by going to so many meetings in the same area of town, I learned something really valuable about how we go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous that I didn't know. As we went to all those meetings in the same area of town, I saw other people that were at multiple meetings over that weekend. I didn't see anybody else doing 18, just me and that guy. But I saw some people that were at 2 or 3 meetings over that weekend. And what I learned about how we go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to correlate it to a football game. Now, a football team is out there on the field for one reason and one reason only, to win the game. And how do they win that game? They huddle up, they make a plan, and they do one play. Then they huddle up again, make a new plan, and they do one play. Well, that's exactly what we do here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the game around here is one day without a drink or a drug, you're a big winner. And how do we do that one day? We run in here and we huddle up. Go, remember, we're bodily, mentally different from our fellows. Break! We go out there and we try a little of this, try a little of that. And we run right back in here and we huddle up. I go, remember, we're bodily, mentally different from our fellows. And just before we break, some guy in the back goes, wait, hang on. Been here for 6 months. I'm sober, but I'm broke and I'm bored. What do? Some old timer will get up and say, son, get a job. Right? We go out there and we try a little of this, try a little of that. Is there any more water in there? Oh. After that weekend, I'm back at the ship and the one other sober alcoholic. There was one sober alcoholic on that ship, many other alcoholics. One sober alcoholic, one member of Alcoholics Anonymous on that ship, and he had been waiting for me. Name was Bob W., and he became my first sponsor before I asked him to be my first sponsor. He just started to do the things that a guy does in AA, right? He was all over me, just dragging me around to meetings, checking up on me 3 times a day, popping his head in my workstation, different meeting every single night, and then hounding me about that blue book. Always hounding me about that book. And I was always evading him on that thing. But I was going to lots of meetings. Oh, boy, whenever the ship was in port, meetings. I'd be out at meetings, coffee, meetings, coffee. Dance. Ah, can't do that. Meetings, coffee, meetings. And yet, if somebody said something clever or insightful, I felt okay in the meeting. Right? I'll never forget the first time I ever heard in a meeting, if you don't take the first drink, you can't get drunk. I mean, that was big news to me. Huge. I remember pacing out in front of that AA club when I heard that, smoking a cigarette, pacing. If I don't take the first drink, I can't get drunk. I think I stayed sober for a day and a half on that. I mean, I was really impressed with that. It just hit me at the level of my soul like you wouldn't believe. So I thought, now, I'm intermittently making very short phone calls up to Seattle to my parents, just to, now, it's serious walk-in on eggshell relationship, right? But they are very forgiving, and they are slightly hopeful. But the conversations are short, and they are difficult. So I call my mom after I hear that little gem of an AA saying, and I said, Mom, you wouldn't believe what they said in the AA meeting today. They said if I don't take the first drink, I can't get drunk. There was silence on the other end of the line. After about 10 seconds, she said, bunch of philosophers there in that AA program, huh? But you see, little things like that were holding me together like a Band-Aid, and I'm avoiding the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm avoiding the steps. So in the middle of the night, you might find me in a foreign country after I'd found as many meetings as I could in that time, in a motel room holding my gut, and now I'm really confused because it's back. That soul sickness that is just eating away at my belly, 1 inch behind there, is just killing me, and I'm like, it's back. Damn it, I'm in AA. Those guys say it's going to get better. But I don't know how long I can stand this. And I can't even put a finger on what's wrong. It's a funny thing. When you're soul sick, you can't put a finger on it until after you've come out of it, and then you see it. It's one of the most blinding things, soul sickness, and especially this thing that we suffer from. And when you take the alcohol and drugs away from me, it's a nightmare. And yet you guys are holding me together week by week, month by month, with your little sayings and keeping me a little bit busy. Finally, when I was about 6 or 7 months sober, the ship had to go out to sea for 21 days straight. Usually we were just out for about 6 or 7 days, maybe 3 or 4, just out. We just did these missions where we hunted submarines or acted like we were hunting submarines and then run back in. And, you know, now it's 21 days straight, and my first sponsor, Bob W., says, hey, every night, 6:30, engine room, way down in the bottom of the engine room. You're going to meet me there. First night, he walks in with that book, and he throws it down on the table, and he says, come on, I've been hounding you about it. Have you read it? And I said something like, well, yeah, sure, there's how it works. We antagonists, some doctor with some opinion about something. See, any one of you members of Alcoholics Anonymous could have cornered me in the back of a room at that time and said, hey, what does it mean that you're powerless over alcohol, that your life would become unmanageable? I would have stuttered and stammered and told you a drinking story or something, and I would have had no concept of allergy of the body, obsession of the mind, and the spiritual malady, and that untreated alcoholism when we have no booze or drugs in us. I would have had no concept of that. Would have had no concept of the fatal nature of alcoholism when we have no booze or drugs in our system. Would have had no concept of it. Right? So what Bob did was he opened up the book, started to read. When he got tired, he had me read. There we are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, down in the engine room, reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the beginning, you know, first number of chapters, he was explaining who all these people were that they only make sort of casual references to. And so he sort of enlightened me as to, what is this thing I'm actually sitting in? Who are these people? Right? I'd heard Bill and Bob, but I didn't know anything about Roland Hazard or Evie Thatcher, or any of these, you know, who Silkworth really was and what his theory really was. I had no idea of any of that, but he was explaining as best he could. Now, he only had 14 months himself. he had a sponsor that was relaying that message to him like just a couple of weeks before he was relaying it to me. And he understood that he needed to pass this on, especially if he was going to be out in the middle of that Pacific Ocean alone. Right? So it's the purest form of Alcoholics Anonymous I've seen. He was so wanting, to do it right. My God. And he also did something else that it's too bad it's rather infrequent. When we got to a point in the book where it actually said to do something, he closed the book and we did it. Then we opened up the book again. And what he did was he tricked me into working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. At the end of that 21 days, we had this list that he was very excited about. I was not excited about it. This list represented numerous appointments that I knew I could not keep and years, I mean decades of poverty. I mean, I was listening to when Gary was talking and I was like nodding my head. Absolutely. I had embezzlement scams going sober. I had stuff going on that was, things that had happened. I mean, we all come into Alcoholics Anonymous with this stuff. You know that thing that happened in that middle of that night that you were fundamentally changed as a human being just by being in the same room. You know that thing that happened that, you just could never tell anybody. It just is so. I remember these things that if I ever thought, I had this grandmother, Icelandic grandmother, just loved me. And I remember sitting on her lap, and I've always, through my whole life, reviewed if she ever knew I did anything like that. Right? We all have this stuff, and it's got to be straightened out or that soul sickness will not go away. I've got to get free of it. We set out on that plan, and it took a long time. But as the book says, when we're halfway through, we will start to get that new freedom and new happiness. And I started to experience that. But I did not get what I truly believe is promised in Alcoholics Anonymous when I took the steps. Right? I got what the book calls a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. I did not get what I truly believe that is promised in Alcoholics Anonymous, a healing at the level of the soul so deep until I started to do something else. Until I started to try to do for others what had been done for me. That's when it really started to happen. And one of the ways that I learned how important it is as a sober alcoholic who has found this solution, who's properly armed with facts about ourselves, how important it is for us to be active members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because it's so important that we take our seat in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because there is nobody else that can affect an alcoholic with the depth and weight that's necessary other than us. So many well-meaning, well-educated people on this planet that really want to help us, and they can help us to a certain level, but they cannot rattle our souls the way we can to each other. The way I found that out, I'll never forget it. Whenever our ship pulled into a port, my first sponsor, Bob, and I would often split a hotel room just to get off the ship because, on those ships, they stack you 60 men in a berthing, right? And you want to get off there if you can. So we would split a hotel room. We'd go to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous that we could find. This particular time, we're in Victoria, British Columbia. We got the hotel room. We went out to the AA club. Out after the meeting, Bob says, I'm just really tired, not feeling that well. I'm going back to the hotel room. I stayed out for a few more hours with the local AAers. And I came back to the hotel room a few hours later. And there's Bob. He's got this guy from our ship named Blair. Blair is hammered. Just hammered. Bob has him propped up against the headboard with pillows. I think even an end table was in there. Bob is sitting there reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to him. And I look at this scene and I think, this is ridiculous. Blair's hammered. He's not going to remember anything. Bob must be really desperate tonight to stay sober. Why didn't he just stay out with us? So I went over to my side of the room, clicked out my light, rolled over, went to sleep. About 3 weeks later, we're back in San Diego, in port. 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm in my rack. All of a sudden, bam! Karl, wake up! It's Bob. What? Blair's on the Coronado Bridge. We're going to get him. You guys probably don't know about the Coronado Bridge, but it's down in San Diego, and it's really a popular suicide spot. In fact, it's so popular that there's actually a suicide hotline phone up at the top, just in case you have a little change in heart. And apparently Blair had climbed up there the night before, and it had a little change of heart maybe, and picked up the suicide hotline phone. And apparently this is what he'd been telling the counselor on the other end. I will only talk to Bob W. So the counselor's saying, who's Bob W? Blair says, it's anonymous. So they somehow drag out of him that he's in the Navy and what ship he's from. They call right down to our quarterdeck of the ship, 3 a.m. in the morning. They go, is there a Bob W on the ship? Now there's 300 men on the ship, but you see, my first sponsor, Bob, would guard your anonymity, but he did not guard his own anonymity at the level of that ship, so he could be of service at any time. So the guy on duty that night at 3 a.m., yeah, Mr. 12 Steps, we know about him. So they go down and get him. So now Bob's at my rack. Come on, Karl, come on, we're going. I'm like, okay, we hop in his car. He says, grab the big book out of the glove box. Get a flashlight. We're going to bone up on working with others. I'm like, well. Says, see your man alone if possible, Bob. He goes, he's alone up there, isn't he? Yep, he sure is. So anyway, we get down to the basic Coronado Bridge, and everything that San Diego County has available for a situation like this is there. Paramedics are there, fire department's there, on-duty psychologists, there. And we walk up on this scene. Fireman in charge looks over and goes, is one of you Bob W.? Bob goes, yeah, that's me. He goes, I don't know what you're going to do. We've been talking for an hour and a half. He ain't budging. But, here. Hands him this little speakerphone, and Bob says into that speakerphone, Blair? Can hear Blair's voice on the other end. Bob, is that you? Bob says, yes, Blair, it's me. Now get the hell down from that bridge. And you hear, okay. One alcoholic can affect another alcoholic like no one else can. Please don't forget that as you move along in your sobriety and the outside parts of life seem to be more important. You want to chase that illusion of things. Fine, go after money and property and prestige. Don't let it come first. This must come first for us sober alcoholics. Please don't forget that, because we will die if we're not here. We got to be here. It's some of the most important work you'll ever find. Got out of the Navy 2 years sober. I told you, moved up to Covina area to go to school. I remember I pulled into this noon meeting, and I met the sponsor that I had for the next 10 years until he died in 1999. His name was Eddie Cochran. Just a wonderful, he was pioneer of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I met him, he had 37 years of sobriety. That meant he was 10 years sober when I was born. And I was 2 years sober, and I remember puttering on it. I'm still push starting the same car because my first sponsor and his sponsor would not let me get a new car until I was like made up my amends, right? They were not letting me jump ahead at all. And so I'm still push starting the car. I'm puttering on up to Los Angeles, everything I own in that car. And I'm thinking, you know what, I got to go to school. I got to work. I'll stop by some meetings when I get a chance, but I got to get a life. I really need a life. I've heard them talk about that in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need a life. And, I'll stop by some meetings when I get a chance. Well, thank God I stopped by this meeting at the, we call it the 502 Club. And Eddie was there. And he came over, and just like that first guy at that first meeting out of treatment, he said, never seen you here before. What's up? Told him, I'm 2 years sober, fresh out of the Navy. I got to get a life. I got to go to school. I got to work. I got to support myself. And it's nice to know where the meetings are, and I'll stop by when I get a chance. But you won't see me very much for a while. And he just chuckled. You see, I am so glad that he treated me like a real alcoholic without even knowing me. See, had I gone and told that to the school counselor, as I'm checking in, yeah, I'm a sober alcoholic, 2 years sober, and I really need to buckle down to school, and I got to get this degree done, and I got to work in the meantime, and I'll stop by some meetings to check on my sobriety once in a while. The school counselor would have said, good idea, buckle down and get it together. Death sentence for somebody like me. Eddie gave me the answer that needed to come to a real alcoholic, and he just chuckled. He said, great, school and work are wonderful things. But that's what we do in between meetings, son. What he was giving me was the secret to long-term sobriety and a feeling of uselessness and a whole life as a sober alcoholic. And he was telling me, basically, that I needed to live in Alcoholics Anonymous and visit the world. Instead of like so many people that I have known over the years that have tried to live out the world and visit Alcoholics Anonymous when convenient, and it doesn't work. Now, when I say live in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not talking about that you need to be at the morning attitude adjustment meeting, the noon meeting, the 5 o'clock happy hour meeting, the 7 o'clock meeting, and the 9 o'clock meeting, and get a job behind the AA counter, right at the club. It's not what I'm talking about. If that's what you're doing, fantastic. Right? Great. But that's not what I'm talking about a spiritual centeredness of knowing who and what I am and what is the most important thing in my life as a sober alcoholic. And that is my participation in Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the first things he told me I needed to do was put newcomers in that car. And I said, Eddie, I've got a hole in the floorboard. I have to push start the thing. He said, put new guys in your car. Your life will get better. I promise you. I didn't see how that was going to happen. But like I said, he was 10 years sober when I was born. Thought I should give it a try. Very first night I did it, I realized he hadn't lied to me. My life got better the very first night. The new guys could push start my car. Getting very close to 9 o'clock. I'm going to close this up. Last 17 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I have found a life that I did not even know was available for a man like me. I have found meaning and purpose. I have found to know, to love other people and to be loved that I never even knew was possible for somebody like me. I'm 42 years old. I got sober at 25. I had been single this whole time, and exactly 8 days from now, I am getting married. My fiance was very excited that I was leaving for New York a week before the wedding. She understands, though. Most beautiful woman I've ever laid eyes on. I can sum up what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me in this short little story. I was asked a number of years ago to go down to Nogales, Arizona to give a talk, and it was one of these outdoor meetings where, I mean, it's a camp out type thing, and, you know, I get there, and I don't know if you've ever been, anybody been to Nogales, Arizona? Anybody from Nogales? Okay, it's the armpit of the United States. It is just, whew, it is, I mean, it's right on the, oh, and this campground was scary, and they introduced me to where my tent was, right next to where the pickup trucks were driving by, and showed me where the outhouse was, and you know, it's not an exciting weekend, but you say you're going to do stuff, you do it. It's very important in Alcoholics Anonymous. And before I left, I had told my mother that I was going to be in Nogales, Arizona, but I really wanted to make sure if she tried to page me, I carry a nationwide pager, that it may not work in Nogales. So don't get excited if I don't answer this weekend. She said, oh, Nogales, just north of there, Don and Leona live. You must stop by and see. They would love to see you. And I had to ask my mother, what? I don't remember who. She described who. I hadn't seen him since I was 8 years old. Best man at my parents' wedding, you know, and a lifelong family friend. And of course. So I call him up, and Don said the magical word to me. He said, do you golf? Now, I'm a golf whore. I will golf anywhere with anybody at any time. I don't even need to know your name. I will golf with you. So I brought my clubs, and I met him, and we're walking along the course. And as we go along the first few holes, I get more confused the more we talk, because he is asking very specific, pertinent questions about my life. He knows all about my life. I mean, he knew what school I graduated from, with what degree, what companies I've been with, the recovery homes I'm associated with. I mean, everything about my life. And by the fourth hole, I go, Don, I'm really confused. I don't know anything about your life. I've tried to get a question in sideways to find out what you've been doing since you've been retired, and, you know, what you retired from. But you seem to know all about my life. How do you know that? He said, well, two things, Karl. First reason is because before your father died in 1996, he was always talking about what you were doing in your life. He was so very proud of you. This was not news to me. As a result of Alcoholics Anonymous, he and I had a great relationship, and I had 10 years sober when he died, and I got to be a full participant in the family on that. The other thing that he said knocked me right out of my socks. I could not even swing the club after that. He said, besides, I get the Christmas letter every year. And I'm like, yes! Finally, I'm in that! God bless. Good night.